Hey, Shepherd family, this is Pastor Scott Seidler, and we've got a timely installment of our Shepherd podcast. Today, I'm joined by Reverend Mark Kiessling. He's the Executive Director for Youth Ministry for the Lutheran Church-Missouri Synod. Over the past 20 years, he has been a leading voice in ministry to youth. And along with his wife, Beth, who happens to be an early childhood educator at Christ Community Lutheran School in Missouri, they exhibit a real strong urge to support the up and coming generations of Christianity. I'm excited to have Mark, a good friend of mine, here on our Shepherd podcast. I look forward to hearing what he has to say, not only about how we can raise our kids better in the Christian faith, but also what the future of ministry to kids is starting to look like and shape up to be. Mark, welcome to our Shepherd podcast. How are things going in Missouri these days?
Pastor Seidler, it's great to be with you. It's going great. We got school kind of back and started in our area, certainly as families and young people are walking through this year of 2020 to 2021, but certainly walking together our people of faith, leaning on God in all these times. But it's been great to see kind of the Christian community come together, whether it's in Lutheran schools, public schools, helping each other out through these unique times, and seeing people faithfully do that. And so there's a lot of blessings into it, certainly the challenges that come with it too, but it's been great to watch the family of God at work.
Yeah, that's awesome. In St. Louis, for those of you who may not be familiar with St. Louis is a really, in many ways, tight-knit community. And so, folks in St. Louis, they tend to grow up with each other, and then they have babies, and those babies grow up with each other, so on and so forth. And so it's just a little different mindset there. And at the same time, just like Mark said, banding together, supporting one another is such a high priority, regardless of whether you're going to private or public school. And Mark, talk a little bit about how you got into youth ministry, and especially what has kept you there in this ministry for as long as you've been there.
Sure. Yeah, a little bit of an unusual path maybe compared to some. So grew up LCMS pastor's kid, rural Montana, was so blessed by a warm congregation that cared on our family as church workers. And I am definitely one that is the product of a lot of people showing grace and investing in young people in terms of the way that I was forgiven, the way that I was given opportunities to lead, the way that I was shown grace in so many ways, not only by my family, but by my church family too, and how they supported young people in our congregation. So, one way I got into it was really kind of an unorthodox way. Like I studied business in my undergrad at one of our Concordias, but was mostly hanging out with the church work students, as I just had an interest in that and knew I wanted to serve somehow vocationally in the church. And so I always thought there'd be different ways that I could do that. And it was really kind of getting out of that time and actually moving into a place where I didn't have a lot of my historical structures, got involved in the church, and people who did not know who I was, did not know I was a pastor's kid, who then again invested in me and said, have you ever thought about going into pastoral ministry? And so it was through that kind of time, a lot of prayer and things, ended up entering the seminary at Concordia St. Louis. And through that time, I've been doing some volunteer work with the youth gathering as well, and always loved working with young people in a lot of different ways. And so it was through kind of connections through that. I actually ended up being at the seminary and then working here at the LCMS Youth Ministry office at the same time, and then later turned into a call. And so how I've stayed in it is I just every day give thanks to God for the people he put into my life, not only my family, but again, people in my home church, people in my Concordia University time, and then people throughout my life, people like you who have invested in me. And I just want to be able to give that back to young people and to know that God loves them and that his church loves them, and that there's individuals in their congregations who want to invest in them and point them to Jesus in all things as they walk through their whole life with God and his path for them.
Yeah, love it. And one of the things I was just going to say, Mark, one of the things I really appreciate about you is that you not only bring the heart to love the kids and their families that are really pressing through some difficult moments in our culture right now, but you also bring a tremendous amount of administrative skill. And that's one of the things that I've always appreciated about you is man, it's one thing to have heart, but you got to put energy and action to the heart. Talk a little bit about just administering youth ministry along with the task of leading youth ministry.
Sure. So in our church body structure, one of the places where it comes to us as a matter of stewardship is we're pretty much fully funded by the LCMS Youth Gathering. And we do a lot more than just the youth gathering too. So we have this event that we do that is a wonderful event, brings 1,500 plus congregations together, 20,000 plus people to celebrate who we are in Christ, other entities and things in the Synod to talk about future vocations, leadership in the church, opportunities to serve in the church and serve in our world. And so we got that great event, but we also do a lot of other things too, resourcing, leadership training along the way, servant events, things that we do. But again, we want to take something like a youth gathering and do more than that. We want to make it more than just the 5 days of that event and the preparation for the event, but then also help congregations who maybe can't come to an event like that or just doesn't fit within their model of youth ministry. And so that they still are connecting with their young people, giving them opportunities to serve, getting them to understand the largeness of the church, places where they can belong and serve and lead in a lot of different ways. So it becomes that matter of stewardship of how do we best use the resources God's given to us, but then also to really give that back to congregations and young people themselves so that they know, again, that the LCMS cares for them, their local congregation does as well, and to build those relationships so they can see kind of that network of who we are as a church body.
Right. Right. Now, you've been doing this for 20 years. You've been married for how many years to Beth?
I've been married. We just celebrated our, 17th anniversary.
Wow. So as you think about, and she's in ministry, she's a preschool educator called to the church. So as you think about ministry with your spouse, just to turn a corner here a little bit in the conversation, how does that work in your house? Because you talked about vocation a little earlier. Everybody has a vocation. Everybody's vocation is a spiritual endeavor. How do you support one another in a you're traveling a lot, at least you were before the pandemic. She's exhausted after dealing with little tinies, all day long. How do you guys support each other in your vocations that are so spiritually intense?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you bring up the pandemic. I mean, we kind of talked about it a lot. That's certainly the most time we've spent together years of our marriage, and we're still together, so that's good.
That's right. I remember Beth would say things like, "Well, Mark's gone again," and you just travel because there's just so many logistical things that have to happen in advance of 25,000 kids and their chaperones descending on a city for a national youth gathering, And so I always remember Beth would be like, "Where's Mark? I don't know. He's, traveling here, there, and everywhere." So this pandemic has got to, this is like marriage adjustment time for you two.
It really was in terms of the time that we spent, because then to her, I'm sure it was pretty much everywhere across the country. School pretty much came to a screeching stop in March. And so we were starting to learn to do that adjustment together, being in the house. So it was interesting to work on those schedules, and we got good, noise canceling headphones, all that good stuff to make that work. So
that's awesome.
To figure out those schedules.
That's right.
Yeah, but to your point, I think it's probably, maybe if I was in a more of a congregational pastoral situation, the rhythm might be a little bit different than maybe what it is being in my role. So we spent some time really getting used to that rhythm a little bit. Certainly being a school teacher, summers are a little bit more flexible, and thank God that's when my time actually can be really more busy, whether it's a youth gathering, we do some other stuff in the summer. And so she's been a tremendous support to me in just volunteering and helping me in those times. And then trying to make that time too to really serve her in her classroom, support her the best I can in terms of, definitely she was kind of joking. Today was her 20th first day of school, but it felt like she was a brand new teacher because there was just so many new things that she was trying to work through with face-to-face class in this situation. And so trying to give her room, being that sounding board to be able to hear ideas and try to give the best insight. It's been interesting in a thing like this to be able to listen to different podcasts or to listen to other people and try to bounce ideas off of, whether it was things that we were starting to plan for the gathering or what she was doing in her classroom. And so really to be that listening ear is best. Now, I say that I fail a lot. To be the support I wish I could be all the time and be able to give the focus I want to, but really trying to be disciplined in that way to sit down and have those times where we can really communicate well. I think that's, obviously a no-brainer, but that communication thing is just so important, to listen well, speak well, and try to learn as best to communicate feelings, thoughts, and just to kind of maybe paint some of those things, whether it's the details of schedules, to just where we're at, kind of taking that temperature of the room of how we're feeling so that we can understand each other. So especially when there is a time of stress like we're under maybe a little bit now, we can kind of fall back into those ways in which we can communicate well. And of course, bathed in prayer, regular worship, all those kind of things too, to be fed by God in that way too.
Sure. It's this idea of you marry someone you know, and then you meet the person that you didn't know as well, right?
Right.
And so you're always in a learning situation. And I think one of the things that my wife, Renee, found out is the amount of thoughtfulness that was required of my ministry. You know, it's one thing to just, go to a hospital or preach a sermon. That's one part of the ministry. But the other part of the ministry that most people don't see in pastors or spiritual leaders like yourself and I is the reflection, the amount of quiet time and processing that has to happen at home, away from the office, away from other staff people, and that quietness. Because like we're dealing with a new something every day. You're in youth ministry, again, to turn the car into a little bit of a different corner. What are some of the things that you're reflecting on these days when it comes to just youth ministry generally? What is occupying your heart and mind in those thoughtful times of reflection that Beth is watching from the kitchen and like, hey, Mark, are you here, Mark? It's all good. I'll just call my parents. How does that all work for you? What are you thinking about youth ministry these days? What's biggest on the radar?
Well, first, I'm gonna talk about this maybe even apart from the pandemic at first. Just kind of where we were at. We recently did a study where we actually studied LCMS millennials, so really young adults, not high school students anymore. We're talking late 20s and the 30s now, to really try to learn some things about what congregations did well to keep connected to their millennials, maybe from their youth into their young adult years, as well as to build those relationships and to prepare them for leaving that home congregation into college life, family, career, whatever it might be, military service.
Right.
And then really to say, like, how does that play then into Gen Z, which has many different things that are different than millennials, and to prepare them for that. And I think some of the things that preoccupy a lot of my time and my prayer time is around, we saw, as with any church body or any churches, is we lose a lot of our young people post-high school graduation. So we've got these great youth ministries that can happen in churches. We invest in that well. And I think there's too much of it's easy for, out of sight, out of mind a little bit. And we're trying to help churches understand you still have this vital role. So don't abandon your parents who are trying to continue to invest in their own children as they go off into these other vocations. But then also, how can the church be those people to maintain that relationship and really to see ministry goes beyond that high school graduation? And on one sense, certainly you're sending them off to be missional people where they're going. Absolutely. Yep. But then don't leave them hanging out there by themselves either. And how do we continue to show support to them through that all? And whether I always appreciated, at Concordia, the way we welcome them back, the way we show their appreciation, but also those care packages, those prayers, those things that we send to encourage them and build those relationships. So that's one key thing for sure for me, is thinking about that transition in life that we do. I think another thing too is looking at is just the overall probably like busyness of families and of the life in which we're in. We can talk about it certainly from a technological standpoint too, the number of voices that speak to our young people, and how do we tune their ears to Jesus? I think love leading people to follow Jesus. How are we leading young people to follow Jesus, to listen to his voice and to hear the good shepherd's voice? Exactly. and to hear his voice and all the stuff. When we were growing up, we were starting to kind of get into that media age, but still I had to turn on a TV to hear it. I had to turn on a radio. And even then I kind of knew what it was going to be, where there's so many opportunities. And how are we providing filters for young people? We can't be the gatekeepers to information anymore. That's for sure. And so how do we develop those filters already at a young age to hear this is godly, this is wholesome for you, this is supporting to you, and man, that gets to be a challenge. Like it can really sound like a lot for a young parent to hear that, but how can the church step in and help them do that and be that place too that walks alongside parents and young people to point them to Christ and those things. So trying to really helping churches really rethink the new world in which we live. Of creating filters and walking alongside young people, because they're in many ways dealing with very mature situations that I didn't have to deal with until later into life.
Sure.
And how are we being realistic about that and preparing them for that, and at times protecting them, absolutely. But the reality of the world in which they live and being empathetic to that.
Yeah. So those words are, I think, for me, are so critical. And I just had a conversation today with my associate pastor, Jake Wampler, about confirmation and about youth ministry then generally. And that word realistic and added to it empathetic is such a critical set of words. And, again, when you and I, maybe some of our listeners were in youth discipleship / confirmation programs, here's the information. You take the information, you spit it out, in a test or two, and then you're confirmed. And I said to Jake Wampler today, I said, here's the deal. I never want a kid to stand up in front of a congregation to be confirmed as an 8th grader, 9th grader, whatever, and perpetrate a lie, spiritually speaking. I want them to be realistic with what they actually believe. And I think a lot of times we kind of whitewash, sugarcoat their level of faith and faithfulness. And man, with all the input coming in, what is realistic for us in our confirmation program? What is empathetic of us as we slowly, stew these kids, not just in a 2-year confirmation program or even a 3-year junior high program, but understanding it's got to start way before then. And they are going to be buffeted by, competing voices for a good long time. How do you see, how is confirmation changing? How is youth discipleship changing given those competing voices? What are you seeing?
Yeah, it was one of those things that we really spent some time on. We were looking, we were hoping when we did the research that we were going to find a silver bullet about confirmation in terms of whether it was teaching style, curriculum, that type of thing. And I think one thing we found, which probably doesn't quite answer your question, but I'll just say it because probably one thing we found research-wise is if you're just looking at confirmation to be that place, is really we're probably still going to find that the part that you see of the family situation or the young person's connection to the church before they start confirmation is probably going to be the same as when they get done with confirmation, without some maybe pretty radical changes, maybe of connection that you're going to do in that time. So one thing I think that we've seen that's worked really well in a lot of cases is building these relationships. And so, yes, there is a knowledge-based part of confirmation, absolutely. But part of it is to understand, that doesn't end at confirmation. So we're trying to create lifelong learners through that process. Is to say, yep, this is a step, this is a time, this is why we do it, that type of thing. But yet to really say, this is just a stepping stone. I mean, I'm a pastor. I still am amazed at, man, when I read a good theological book, or I go back and read the scripture again, man, how did I miss this for all these years I've been reading this? Here it is right in front of me. And because of my sin or my cloudedness of my thought, I was not open to really what the Holy Spirit was trying to communicate or what Jesus was saying. So to understand that lifelong learning side of it. And then those churches who really find ways to build relationships between, the pastor or whoever the instructor may be and the young person, and then rallying other adults into that too. And so that they can tell those stories of grace that have happened in their life and of failure and of struggle. And so that they see that, man, that person has made it through these steps and I can make it too, thanks to God's grace. So I think that's been this other investment, is that it's not let's go put confirmation back in the corner and be alone. But yet, man, when you get a pastor or again, church worker, whoever's leading, who's enthusiastic and wants to be there to be a part of it, and then have other adults that rally around them and support them, and some things that we've seen effectively. And I think too, it is preparing them for the fact that, to be honest about what the world in which they live, the voices that are there, the amount of chatter that they're dealing with, and once on one level, the world hasn't changed. We've always been dealing with this, but at the same time, say, how do we as faithful Christians deal with that, and to be honest with them about it and help them prepare for that. And certainly there's things you need to prepare for to be at the right level for the student and topics you go into. But I think just to be honest with them and be in their world with them.
Yeah, it is amazing to me that parents really are the gatekeepers, right? It's an awesome burden to bear. You're not just raising a human being, but you're raising a soul as well. And my wife Renee and I, we realize that the amount of courage it takes to endure their eye rolls. And I don't know if you find this as well, but I find that my youngest is much more verbally competitive and accomplished than my oldest is, who's 10 years older. And again, it's a matter of voices. When you're constantly being fed verbally competitive YouTube videos and TikToks and whatever else, you will just assimilate that verbal strength of speaking, right? Which is what verbal strength is. It has to do with speaking. Anyways, all of this to say, I think that's where the courage comes in. As parents, you've got to push through that, and you cannot wilt because they are just rolling their eyes at spiritual conversation, soul-related topics, confirmation-related programming. You got to really push through that. I mean, how do you help parents, or maybe what resources have you come by that really help parents grow a backbone? And I'm asking for a friend, by the way.
Right. Well, and I think something too, without necessarily going into like studies of it, is that I think on top of being parents is you certainly have a society that is not backing up that conversation for you.
Right.
So there's not necessarily going to be those places that, and I'm not saying we were looking for like doctrinally sound things all the time about our Christian, or specifically our Lutheran beliefs in things,
right.
But just in general, you turn on television, you turn on stuff, you're not going to have much talk at all probably of faith or
right.
God of what we would recognize. So it makes it even, I think, additional. You don't have that help for you as a parent. So right. I think a couple things is, one, I'm for parents, I'd say being open to allowing for support. So being open to not be offended by to ask for help, I guess, in that sense, and receiving help to hear from other parents who have walked this road and know the struggles and know the difficulties, and to know that support, to be in prayer together, and to be in that community, in your local congregation and other places. That is such a huge blessing. I mean, some things that certainly have seen right in our own church body, some things that Lutheran Hour Ministry is doing with creating the households of faith, spiritual conversations, really good kind of introductory things. And I always really appreciate the conversation that, man, we love our kids. Let's never say it's too late to start those conversations.
I love that.
Don't feel you missed the boat. But man, the Holy Spirit will work through those interactions, through situations in life. And one thing I would say is, like, don't necessarily feel like you have to have every answer too. I think that's some of the intimidating side of it, is just to walk alongside. And this is what we saw in our research, even going back to that, is that key indicators of young people to stay connected to, and this was specifically the LCMS, but even to just the Christian church in general, was just doing those practices, being in worship. Right. We believe the Holy Spirit works through that, through being in worship, receiving word and sacrament ministry, being in community together, and just being that example to your young person that, when the things are tough, is that, man, we're going to do what we need to do. Maybe now it's to watch it virtually, but yet to be in worship, to do those things, because that's where we're going to be strengthened, is to be in that community and to receive God's gifts that way. So those type of things, being in the Word, and just being that example of being in the Word. So then you can, like you said, then you can speak even more to say, oh, that makes me think of a psalm I read today in my devotion, as we're walking through some difficult times. And then just being open about prayer as well, starting with meal prayers, but then even be able to just show, when I've got concerns, even when I have joys, I bring those to God, and know that. And then the other big thing that we saw was just an openness for parents to either talk about faith, but even if you don't feel comfortable about that, to have an openness to talk about real life issues. And that when young people felt comfortable to ask their tough questions, and maybe even be able to say, you know what, I don't know, but let's either go talk to our pastor, go talk to our DCE, or go talk to our church worker, or I'm going to go talk to this other parent. That was just a huge removal of guilt and burden from young people, to know that my parent cared enough about me to talk about, like you said, you're raising a soul, and that's that soul asking that question, and to be able to respond to that. And so those are some of the key things we saw. We're trying to, in LCMS Youth Ministry, trying to get into a little bit more of how to resource parents. But again, right now, Lutheran Hour Ministry is a key one. Obviously, Concordia Publishing House has some things too, some great things online too, just to support parents in that walk, as so they're not discouraged along the way. And the parents' courage is one thing. The initiative is another. And like you said, it's never too late
And my encouragement is always just do something.
Yeah.
Just throw a dart. I mean, that's my favorite phrase. Just throw a dart. Mention the name of God in a day at least once. Don't take it for granted, in other words. Are you seeing anything in these pandemic days related to spirituality in light of the pandemic? Are you seeing any trends develop? I mean, worship, I'll just be honest and say, in my own house, to sit in front of a TV and do digital worship, it's one thing to listen to the sermon, because I'm used to, and my household is used to listening to a sermon being spoken at you. But doing the prayers, singing along with three people in a room, one of whom is 14 years old, soon to be 14. I mean, it's just plain awkward, frankly. So, how are you finding this pandemic impact on families and especially youth spirituality? Are you seeing any trends beginning to develop that you're noting?
Yeah, we're certainly keeping some eyes on things. Some of the early surveys that we've kind of seen, and as congregations kind of wrestle with this, I think one of the largest pieces, and I think you got two sides of it. You've got the church who's wrestling with, we're used to having either these programmatic relationship connections or these relational connections that work, and we're just really wrestling to be able to assess, are we doing okay with our youth ministries? And some have tried, doing the Zoom part thing, maybe online. Others have done some great jobs of going to more like just one-on-one contact, phone calls, texts, whatever it might be. And now I don't think we ever necessarily dreamt that we'd be this far into it and we'd still be looking at this avenue of ministry. So I think there's a little bit of like figuring out where are our relational connections and how do we best do this, especially if this extends for a while. I think the thing, we've kind of been talking about it. I think a little bit anecdotally and seeing a few surveys about there have been a lot of parents, just because you got a pretty catastrophic thing going on in our lives and they're spending more time together, that they've kind of been put into that spot to have these conversations. And so I'm praying this really has been this catalyst for families and parents to be in those spiritual conversations at home, and that this could bear fruit moving ahead, they'll be able to look back to these days and say, man, remember when we had those really good conversations around this time, we got in the Word, we were in worship together, that there'll be some strengthening bonds there. I think the other thing that's interesting too that we saw through this time is it was really great to see young people take on leadership, because basically the pandemic put us into their world. So I would just love to know how many LCMS young people were the ones doing the Facebook Live, doing all this kind of Zoom calls, all this kind of stuff when church had to go online. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, I can be used by the church. Look how I get to serve in this way. And so this is a time too to where we saw young people really be able to ask to step up and lead. It was really encouraging to see that. So I think the big thing, I think that on the other flip side that we have to keep an eye on is just probably around mental health and loneliness issues, especially if this extends longer. And so for the church and for parents not to, continue, like you said, push through, be that resilient church and say we got to keep these connections, because that's where I get a little bit concerned. Without these physical connections, without these face-to-face connections, is where mental health and some of our the health of our young people is going to be. So I think that could be one of these kind of real issues. And it may not be our Christian young people. There's going to be some of that, but especially amongst their friends too, as they are those people going out with the light of Christ into their vocations, is to equip them to be able to be those people to share the goodness of the gospel and people who are really hurting through times right now.
Yeah. We had one of our first podcasts that we did here at Shepherd of the Desert was with a social worker by the name of Kathy Bauer, a member of our congregation, worked with junior hires in guidance counseling, school counseling. And she had some great insight about mental health. If you're listening to this podcast for the first time, joining us maybe as a part of our new part of our Shepherd family, you can go back on our website at shepherdaz.church. And you can find that and a whole host of other podcasts and digital ministry media that may be of encouragement to you. Make sure you do that. Hey, Mark, I'll get you out on this question. You've given us so much resource here to think through and think about. Is there and are there ways that we can support you in your leadership, either as a congregation here at Shepherd of the Desert or just individually in terms of reaching out into our Lutheran Church-Missouri Synod, that denominational youth ministry?
Absolutely. We'll certainly continue to keep us in prayer. we're moving ahead. We do a triennial national youth gathering. So we'll be in Houston in 2022. So we're just starting the process for that. The theme will be in all things. And so keep that process in your prayers. We're still learning every day about what that might look like and learning what that might be. And certainly our churches are starting to prepare for that too. So keep them in your prayers. We're going through some transition things too, looking at how, again, for this generation, how do we invest in them and how do we train them up to be leaders in their world? And so we're looking at some exciting things going ahead. So we ask for your prayers as we hopefully bring that to fruition and be hopefully looking for information coming out about that. So certainly you got young people who are interested in that. That's one way that you can support and send them to those trainings we're doing so they can get to know other Lutheran young people to continue to build that generation to support our church and to be able to reach out into our communities and love on that way. The other thing too, if you're looking for resources, we do have a resource website, youthesource.com. And so we've got a number of things there, including what we call as our platform, as our 7 practices of healthy youth ministry. And so we got information there. That kind of goes along with the research and some other things that we've been doing. So some focus on parents and how adults can support young people. And then there as well too, continue to just be empathetic, I would say, to your young people. Listen to them, get them into opportunities to serve and lead. And really unleash their gifts that they can be used in your church. It's going to be good not only for your church there locally, but for the greater church as well as they go off into other careers and serve in the church in a lot of different ways. So we're so thankful for congregations, leaders like you who invest in them, point them in the direction in the church, but most of all, connecting them to our Shepherd Jesus.
Well, I love it. And I just am so appreciative, Mark. You know, you're part of the effort here at Shepherd in trying to do ministry in new ways. And you all are at the forefront of innovative ministry by the sheer fact that you're dealing with new generations that have never been ministered to before. And so as we wrap up today, I just want to, again, welcome those of you, especially who may be listening to this Shepherd podcast for the first time. I'm here in our new digital ministry media center here on our Shepherd campus in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I want to thank you all for your continued support, not only in person as you participate, but also through your prayers and also through your financial support. If you have the opportunity and the inclination, would appreciate you considering an offering to our Shepherd ministry. While we can't pass the baskets like we do with our typical church offerings on Sunday morning in these pandemic and at a distance days, we certainly have means by which that financial support can come in and continue to support the expansion of our digital ministry, which now has reached in a matter of only 4 months over 1 million views and watching by literally tens of thousands of people. Not just here in Scottsdale, but worldwide. I'm grateful for you, Mark. Thanks so very, very much. Say hi to your wife, Beth. Give her our love from sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where it's a balmy 116 degrees today. And Shepherd family, thank you for tuning in as well. This is Pastor Scott Seidler, and I'll look forward to seeing you again real soon.